Hello, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I am here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Guthrie.
And then we have a very special guest today, Roger Dooley, author of Brainfluence, and he's a pretty famous keynote speaker, I would have to say. Hello, Roger.
Hey, Guthrie.
So
glad to be here.
Yeah. Susan, I guess I'll let you kick it off. I think you have a more of a history with Roger than I do.
Yeah, Roger.
That sounds ominous.
It does.
We weren't going to talk about our history, I didn't think.
No, we weren't going to. But these podcast hosts, they're just they're very manipulative. No, Roger and I. Wow. Let's see. You interviewed me on your podcast a while ago, wasn't it? I don't even
probably due for another episode.
Okay, that was years ago, and then you put together a panel at South by Southwest that we did along with Natalie Nahai and
Muriel, yes.
Yeah, and that was
a great panel.
Was that like 2000?
That was about 3 years ago, I think.
Or something like that, yeah. Yeah, it was a fun panel. So that's kind of how Roger and I know each other, Guthrie, and of course I, follow his blog and let's give the URL for the blog since I mentioned it. Go ahead, Roger.
The best place to find my blog is neurosciencemarketing.com/blog. And for generally the shortest path to my other stuff, my Forbes blog, entrepreneur blog, and so on would be just start at rogerdooley.com and follow the links there.
So can I lead off with a question?
Sure. Well, it's okay with me. He's the one that has to answer it.
Hey, it's your show.
Okay, so you sort of you were ahead of the curve when it came to neuroscience marketing, which is that's obviously like you just said the name of your blog. What was it? What was the moment where you were like, or what led you to be like, this is going to be hot? Because I know we've gone to conferences for a bunch of years, and 5 years ago we'd go to a conference and Susan would be the only person talking about brain science, neuroscience, and people are like, oh wow, that's really interesting. And now every conference you go to, it's nothing but neuroscience and Kahneman and just research.
And your book came out, Roger, the Brainfluence book. I don't know.
2011.
Yeah, 2011 it came out.
Yeah.
You were probably working on it even before that.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's an interesting question. What got you to start thinking about this intersection between neuroscience and marketing?
Well, okay, it dates all the way back to my college years. This was a really ancient history, but I was in engineering school, and even though it really had nothing to do with it, I was pulled in a couple of directions. One was psychology. I was a psychology minor, and I think I was the only engineering student that I knew that was minoring in psychology. I also had this interest in advertising, and that was completely inexplicable. But when I was supposed to be in the library studying differential equations and organic chemistry, instead I'd be reading Advertising Age. And I really didn't pursue those interests after I graduated. But eventually it started to come full circle. I had basically a typical engineering career, worked my way into product management, which was more marketing, then finally senior strategy management. And when I was about 30, I was in charge of strategic planning for a Fortune 1000 company. And at that moment, chose to bail out of the corporate world and become an entrepreneur, and started a direct marketing company. And we were selling using catalogs in the very early home computer market. And this was really fun. It was a quantitative kind of marketing. And that really sort of enabled me to get back into the advertising space and even do A/B testing and so on, which is pretty crude by today's standards of A/B testing with the digital tools we have. But then, we actually had a pretty good idea of what was working. And that evolved over time into a more digital business, built really huge college community, which sold later to part of the Daily Mail Group. But in about, 20, when I was about probably about 13 years ago or so, I saw this sort of intersection of neuroscience and marketing. And I was not the only person to see it. There were a few small neuromarketing startups then that were trying to get clients and trying to claimed with varying degrees of success that they could predict which ads would work and which ones wouldn't by using some kind of neuroscience tool, whether it was fMRI or EEG or some other kind of test. And so being a marketing guy, I said, oh, I think I'll get a domain. And it was actually kind of interesting because at the time my daughter was a neuroscience major at Columbia and decided to eschew the academic route and go into marketing. So I thought, oh yeah, this could be interesting. She might want to do some writing here. But I started writing. I really found it fascinating. And the more I got into it and the more I got feedback from my readers, I found a couple things. First of all, that there really was a lot happening in this space, although initially the credibility was extremely low. Most established academics and neuroscientists thought the idea of neuromarketing was just a joke or a fraud or pseudoscience. And there were almost no academics working in the space. I mean, there were some folks that were doing things like in decision science, Lowenstein at Carnegie Mellon and Knudsen at Stanford were doing some really fascinating studies on the pain of paying using fMRI. But by and large, neuromarketing was not a respected field. But the other thing I found was that these tools really were available only to big brands. In other words, BMW or Coca-Cola could go out and do EEG studies on panels of 25 or 50 people and maybe get some answers about their advertisements, version A versus version B, which one was more engaging, what were the high points and the low points and so on. But there really wasn't much available for the vast majority of marketers who were either in smaller scale organizations or even in large organizations. Not every problem gets the budget of a Super Bowl ad. Many problems just have to be answered by gut feel or something else, or by experience, not by going out and running costly tests. So I began to write more and more about applying behavioral science to marketing problems too. And I found that my readers tended to respond to that kind of content a lot more. And just as you mentioned, Guthrie, talking about Kahneman and Cialdini and a lot of the folks who were really the original scientists and authors in the space, there is a lot of interest in applying that kind of knowledge to real-world problems, first of all, but that didn't require separate testing using neuroscience tools. So I still have a soft spot for traditional neuromarketing. And the good news there is that it is getting more academic respect. Now, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, probably going on 3 years ago, there was a big study at Temple University that evaluated about 5 different techniques for measuring or for predicting ad success. They looked at fMRI, EEG, implicit testing, eye tracking, and I don't know if there may have been something else in there. And what they found in those tests was that fMRI was the only one that predicted better than just simply asking people questions in a survey. But the critics of that study would say that they were, in fact, fMRI experts. That's what they had in their lab, were fMRI machines, and they only tried to duplicate best practices for the other techniques. So the providers of those other techniques would say that they could get better results. But the key conclusion from that study was that, indeed, the tools of neuroscience, neurophysiological measures, metrics, could predict ad success. And that was from a respected research university, and I forget what journal it was published in, but in a respected journal. So, that really, I think, opened the door for other universities to explore the space. So I think we're definitely seeing more work in the area. In Europe, there's a number of universities that have master's programs. I've lectured at Autonomous University in Barcelona, Complutense University in Madrid, where they have master's programs in neuromarketing. To my knowledge, there's not a U.S. university that does yet, but there's there's certainly there's more academic respect now. So that is sort of a long answer to the evolution of both my interest in neuromarketing and maybe a little bit of the neuromarketing industry too.
Yeah, it's I remember being at a jazz music camp in the state of Washington. This is something I do. That's what I do when I go on vacation, is I go play jazz and sing jazz. There was a guy there who is an actual neuroscientist, like
Mm-hmm.
he does research on primates and records the firings from particular neurons, right? And he just couldn't stand the entire, as far as he was concerned, it was all junk. Like there wasn't anything scientific about applying neuroscience to marketing. So I was trying to have a conversation with him, but I have to say it didn't go real well. I don't think.
Well, it's
mind was
partly
very
the industry's
open.
own fault, Susan. I think that some of the early service providers made claims that were unsupportable and not based on really solid science.
Yeah.
In other words, they would pinpoint particular areas of the brain and say, well, this says this about what the customers
Right.
think. And that really there was not justification for those claims. And even my friend Martin Lindstrom got kind of pilloried, where he wrote an article for the New York Times probably about 6 years ago that compared the way people love their iPhone to romantic love, and citing some brain scan data. And that caused a huge uproar in the neuroscience community. Like 50 eminent neuroscientists co-signed a letter
Oh my
saying
gosh.
that that's and wrote, had it published in the New York Times saying that's ridiculous garbage. But that was 6 years ago, and I think the mood has changed now.
So when you you do a lot of speaking, public speaking, and we do also. What do you find is the and you're speaking to some fairly I would think some fairly sophisticated audiences in terms of marketing. Do you think what's the state of knowledge out there, if just among regular marketing people? Are they pretty up on neuromarketing? Are they still at the kind of overgeneralized statements? Do you find they really are learning a lot?
Yeah, I think the awareness is growing pretty much every day. We're seeing more companies offer neuromarketing type services. I think we're seeing agencies now offering both neuromarketing services as well as using behavioral science. I just was speaking the other day to a person in charge of behavioral science at Ogilvy, which is, in fact, something that I'm seeing, which is really sort of a surprise. I was just at a conference late last year in San Francisco, and it was organized by Om Marwa, who's the head of behavioral science at Walmart and Sam's Club. And first of all, I found it pretty amazing, although I'd known him and known about him for a while before that, but that Walmart would have a top behavioral science guy. Just that, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, maybe, companies were not thinking that way. And the way companies are using this skill is both externally for marketing purposes, but also internally. They're trying to, certainly Thaler and Sunstein's book Nudge showed how simple interventions could change behavior, often for good. In other words, you can get people to be organ donors if you opt them in. They want to be organ donors, and this simply makes it happen in a more easy way. Or you can get people to sign up for retirement plans if you opt them in. And very simple little interventions like this can cause really major good for companies and for society. So these behavioral scientists now can solve both internal problems, say for the human resources department who are trying to change behavior in positive ways, and also on the marketing side of things where they can try and appeal to customers more effectively or develop more effective market research techniques.
That was a great way of phrasing that. That was a good spin.
So Guthrie, as a behavioral Roger Guthrie's, we go back and forth a lot with me being the, I call myself a behavioral scientist. He would call me a behavioral psychologist and himself a behavioral economist. And he actually just put out a video in which he kind of walks through what he sees are the differences between them. But Guthrie, it sounds like your field, behavioral economics. I might have to make sure I don't lose you to a company who wants to hire you as an internal behavioral economist.
It's so interesting because the behavioral economist papers, your behavioral psychologist stuff, it seems to gravitate towards more design UX stuff, and the behavioral economics stuff tends to gravitate more towards marketing, market research, which I find interesting. Yeah, I have I'm not going to anyone who's listened to this podcast knows that I cock my head sideways and kind of question Richard Thaler and his nudge principle, because it all starts out with good, but I watch ads now because we've done work with plenty of ad companies, and so I'm sitting there watching ads. And they're doing all kinds of really, really great behavioral science stuff to get attention, and I'm like, oh, it's I feel almost like Oppenheimer watching the explosion of the atomic warhead and being like, what, what have we unleashed? We were
right.
Just...
Well, no, I think that's a valid concern, and if you listen to Robert Cialdini speak.
Sure.
He'll use the word ethical about 100 times in his speech,
right.
Emphasizing that like any tool, you can use it for good or bad. And another, we mentioned Nir Eyal a little while ago. Mm-hmm. His book Hooked basically decodes how Instagram and Facebook and other fairly addictive apps hook you. And he sort of teased out the model, and it's definitely got some ties into dopamine reward system. And some companies manipulate you very effectively, whether they're online games or social sites like the ones I just mentioned. And again, whenever you hear Nir speak, he always emphasizes that, yes, these tools exist, but you want to use them for good. But of course, like any other field, not everybody does. Then it's probably the most common question I get asked is if I do a speech and talk about different sort of brain-based or behavior-based techniques that you can use to improve your marketing, to convert more people on your website or sell more stuff or whatever. People say, well, is this ethical? At what point does it become a manipulation rather than good persuasion?
And that's also Susan's most commonly asked question as well.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear Susan's answer, but I'll give you my answer first. And I go back to Zig Ziglar, who is probably the most famous salesperson and sales trainer of all time. And he wrote a dozen or more books on sales, including at least one that was like 20 ways to close a sale. Now, they certainly sound manipulative, like, the presumptive close, like, would you like this delivered Tuesday or Wednesday, sir? Well, shall I write you up for the red one or the green one? And a whole variety of techniques that were designed to get people from that moment of indecision to agreeing to buy the product. And he had a couple of statements. So one that probably goes even maybe a little bit farther than I might go, but he did say that if you really believe in your product, that it is good for its purpose and for the customer, then it's your ethical obligation to sell it. Now, that may go a little bit far for me and for perhaps for you folks too, but he also said that your most important tool of persuasion is your own integrity. And by that, I think he meant if you are closing a sale to get a customer to a better place, if they'll be happy with their purchase, if they won't regret the purchase 24 hours later or a week later, and the product will actually do what they expect it to do for them, or the service will, then helping them conclude the deal with some more, say, advanced persuasion techniques like the ones that he described is fine. Because otherwise they may not get to that better place in their life. So, that's really the way I look at it. If you're helping the customer get to a better place, then it's okay. If you are convincing them to do something that they will regret, they'll be unhappy with, then no, it's unethical. But when you think about it, just about every tool that marketers have can be used or abused. I mean, you can have an ad that has truthful content, or you can have an ad that is deceptive. Maybe it actually has falsehoods in it. Maybe it leaves out important information that the customer would want to know. But by and large, most advertisers take the high road and advertise honestly. And I think the techniques that we all talk about, we have to use the same way.
I like that. We asked this question to a lot of different people who come on here, but they're mostly not marketers. They're mostly designers. And their answer is very product based, or very from the side of the company, like it's the company's obligation.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the approach you just said, which is really from the consumer's perspective, and it doesn't have to do with the company. So
yeah, and when you get into user experience issues and design issues, there's often a fine line there, and you've probably seen some of the dark patterns discussions where having a user interface that is easy and guides people into the desired behavior is good up to a point. It's desirable. I mean, certainly you've all had user experiences that are horrible, that we can't even figure out how to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. But then you can go too far where you induce people to click on things or do things or opt into things that they wouldn't if they were aware of what they were doing. But when you've got a giant green continue button that opts you into something bad, like delivering all your email contacts to LinkedIn or something, and then there's like a little tiny gray no thanks to text if you don't want to do that, that's clearly crossing the boundary into manipulation, where you're not giving the consumer an informed choice. And LinkedIn was famous for that. They've toned it down a little bit, but they still have some really weird things. Like, for instance, when for some reason, LinkedIn wants you to connect with other people, even though their instructions have always said only connect with people you know, and those are the words they say. But if you look at their user interface, it is the opposite. It invites you to connect with people that you don't know. If you get a request from somebody, and look at their profile to see, gee, I don't know this person. I don't even know why they'd want to connect with me. You look at their profile, there's a big button that says accept, but there's not an ignore or delete invitation button that's visible. You have to hunt around for that. And so they clearly want to foster connections, and they do that a whole bunch of ways. The example I gave a few minutes ago of more or less tricking you into giving up your email list or your Gmail contacts or Yahoo Mail contacts is a real example. I don't know if they're still doing that, but for a while after you connect with somebody, there would be a big button that said continue. And what you were really doing is saying, hey, sure, you can have all my email contacts.
As far as I remember, I think things changed a little bit after Microsoft bought them, right? That was
right. They do seem to have toned it down a little.
Though Microsoft has its own history of forcing opt-ins, that be it Internet Explorer.
Yeah, they still do.
Yeah, no, I know. or though some of them, at least like when they're trying to make everyone update their computer, and they kind of put at least there's like a good security justification.
Yeah, the Internet Explorer one though.
Yeah.
Gets to be a bit much.
All right, Susan, we didn't get your thoughts about the ethical question, which I know we've talked about before, but I wanted to let you respond if you had any.
I don't know that I have any, more newer insights than I've had before, which have always been beleaguered and confused. To be honest, I think it's a really huge question, and I don't, Guthrie, you and I have talked about. You've even come up with some interesting quantitative ways to measure ethical impact, but it's a big question, but it's one that's been around forever. Even if you look at the field of advertising, advertising's been doing various things to try and manipulate people to or persuade people.
I remember being, 7th grade, 10th grade, somewhere young in school, and we were in social studies, I think, something like that, and there was a section that we were doing, like an advertising section, and then there was a whole discussion where I believe it was Coke. There was a famous poster where it was, the classic glass Coke bottle, but the bubbles, if you look closely, actually were in like the shape of like attractive women. But if you like zoomed out, you wouldn't be able to notice. But if you actually looked at it, so like it was like this like
the subliminal.
Yeah, I don't know if I buy that. There was a guy, an author a while back who wrote a book, I think fake? Subliminal Seduction or something like that, and some follow-on books that were full of these things that only he could see. So like, look at that ice cube. Don't you see the naked woman in there, or the the dead person or whatever? And like you'd look at it and say, no. You had to have special vision to see what he was seeing.
No, I'm just talking more about just just the whole idea of messaging about going back to the 50s and the 60s, and how any product has been marketed. I think and Roger, I'd be interested to know if you think this is true or not. My impression has been that a lot of the things that the advertising world has been doing for decades worked, and a lot of them worked because there were neuroscience principles behind them. At the time, they didn't even necessarily know that. They just kind of knew what worked and what didn't work, and they did what worked. And so in my mind, the applying principles of neuroscience to marketing, let's say, is not necessarily new. It's just that now we understand why some stuff works and why some stuff doesn't. or why some
think
stuff makes
that's a
sense.
story of science in general, where people have made observations about the world for a long time, and only it's later on that we understand the science that causes that phenomenon. But yeah, I think advertisers going all the way back to the early 20th century were, uh, in some cases, pretty good students of human behavior and psychology, even though psychology was, not all that advanced then. You had Freud and some of his ideas, which aren't necessarily too well accepted today. But, you had these campaigns like the one for Lucky Strike that made cigarette smoking by women acceptable by packaging it as a sign of independence, as opposed to a habit that was really mainly for guys, and it wasn't suitable, for women. So, this stuff has existed for years. And if you read Ogilvy, a lot of his ideas are totally relevant today because he understood behavior, even though he wasn't necessarily, using the language of modern behavioral science. He really got it. And that's one reason, one of the questions that I was asked, particularly in the earlier days of neuromarketing, a little bit less so now, is that, well, aren't advertisers now with these tools going to create ads that are so powerful that they'll just overwhelm consumer defenses? And the way I answered that was no, because if it was possible to create ads like that, they would already exist. There've been enough smart advertisers doing enough advertising that they would have stumbled across it by design or by accident. And so really what I see the power of neuromarketing tools is not to create ads that are incredibly persuasive and powerful, but rather to screen out many of the really bad ads that are annoying and ineffective, which numbers show are the majority of ads. There was one study, I forget who did this study, but for brand advertising, and there were only about 20% of the ads that actually improved brand perception. There were like another 20% that didn't do anything to harm it. And then there's a bunch that actually caused the brand to decline in its perception. Maybe it wasn't more than half, but the statistics were really impressive that there was only a small portion of the of advertising that actually worked. And undoubtedly some portion of it was not only ineffective, but harmful to the brand. And if you could get rid of that stuff that hurts the brand, that annoys the consumer, that they, when it comes on, they switch the channel, that is, that's perhaps the greatest benefit of neuromarketing.
Yeah.
Well, so two quick thoughts on that point. I mean, because the first is that you look at there's a subset of population who does not want these big companies like a Google, to have all this information and so they can market specifically to you, right? So you're watching a YouTube video, and on the flip side though, there is an argument to be made that what if I like watching cats and I like watching stuff about cats and I like things in a certain way, and so if there's an ad that's pleasant and has cats in it, that I'm going to be like, oh, what a great ad. And so it's like a mutual beneficial thing. That I can watch ads that I want, but also they can target me.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, I think that's a real benefit. I would much rather see ads that were related to something that I'm interested in rather than, totally irrelevant ads. And so, I think in general, that part is a benefit. Now if they carry it too far by sort of micro-targeting you, there was the flap a few years ago when Target found that by using it was a big data analysis project, they found that there were certain groups of products that newly pregnant women tended to buy. And there were not obvious things that would relate to being pregnant, but there were things like lotion, and I forget what the other ones were. So they said, oh, this is brilliant. And they found it was very predictable and repeatable. So they did this analysis. They created a flyer of products for newly pregnant women and sent it out and caused this immediate flap when people were getting these at home. And hey, why'd you send my daughter one of these? She's 16, and where she had not told her family that she was pregnant. And that is at the point where it's crossing a line into invasion of privacy, or just really too a little bit too creepy for words. I think it's up to the marketer to try and draw that line and get relevant ads. And even now the retargeting. I mean, I'm sure you've had that experience where you're shopping for a suitcase, you buy a suitcase, and then for the next month, all you see are suitcase ads, even though you've got your suitcase. That can get to the annoying point too. But eventually, they'll be smart enough. I mean, certainly. Once Amazon controls all e-commerce, they'll know that you bought the suitcase, and they won't bother you with suitcase ads for a while, or maybe they'll just bother you with complimentary ads. Hey, we see you bought a rollerboard. Perhaps you'd like the full-size suitcase too, or the purse.
I for one accept our robot Amazon overlords. So that's
yeah. I mean, they have been pretty good about building consumer trust. Yeah. I mean, they've obviously got a lot of data. But they've used it in I think, a wise and effective way so far, and they're, a very trusted and respected brand.
Yeah.
In Texas, I had my own little A/B test here where I was a pretty regular Amazon customer, but then a few years ago, they negotiated a deal with Texas where they would start charging Texas sales tax and remitting that to the state, and Texas would. They helped them build some warehouses and train people and whatnot. So it was sort of a win-win for everybody except for the consumer, who now had an 8% higher bill. And what I found was my buying behavior did not change significantly because of that. Even though they suddenly had this basically an 8% price increase, my behavior was not all that affected because of my trust in them. And, they say, hey, our prices are fair, and they almost always are fair. We will have it to you on Tuesday, and when they tell you that, they'll have it to you on Tuesday. It's so to me, they've done a great job of building their brand.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the other question I had for you before I forget it, which is, so we're gonna take a step back. I agree that there's not an ad that's so effective, because I think that's good reasoning that advertising would have found it already. But I do think they're not necessarily a successful ad, but there are new ways to grab attention that I think can overwhelm people's defenses to a pretty large extent, that is becoming more and more popular. So there's always been,
what?
So you can think of ads in the past. They used to have stuff where, the graphic like pops on the screen, right? And that, I think for most people, especially, kids my age, that's kind of worn off, and that doesn't really do a whole lot for us. But there are a couple ads. I have two specific examples. I was watching an ad, I believe, for a car commercial, and at the end of the car commercial, I think it was a car commercial, maybe it was a tire commercial, it doesn't really matter. So they're driving up to a drive-through window, and all of a sudden, this thing pops out and makes like a loud noise, like it's like a character at like a haunted house, for example, and it goes "poo," right? It's like loud and scary, and then the guy from the ad pops out, it's like, "Haha, got you," and everyone laughs like, "Oh, you got me!" Like, what a funny joke. Right? And it was some celebrity, right? They were playing a prank on each other. But what they were really doing was having a moment where all of a sudden something it was a jump scare in an ad, and then they played it off as, oh, it's you're just
as
playing
a joke
prank
on the celebrity.
Yeah, and so it wasn't like a scary ad. So, but that's essentially what they were doing. And there's no, I'm very susceptible to horror movies because I'm a little scaredy cat. So it always grabbed my attention. So that's one. And then the second is, a lot of ads, they put the buzz or rings of a cell phone in the ad itself, as if you were getting a text message. And of course, me being totally trained, right? I look up and And I
got to feel your pocket, right? And
so you wouldn't think about it. So those are two pretty specific examples where they're really grabbing attention in a pretty significant way. And even though, again, maybe it doesn't affect the brand, it overwhelms me as a human's, at least at the moment, like defenses to ignore it.
Well,
yeah, I think
it's causing you to have a particular. I mean, in the case of the pop-up and the scare, I mean, that's gonna, you're gonna have a release of stress hormones, and they're doing that because they know that when you're in a high arousal state, your memory will be impacted and so on. So
and I remember the ad, so like it clearly worked.
Right.
But if it annoyed you, you might remember it in a negative context too. You might think, "Oh, I hate that ad. It scares me every time." And I think that's the danger with using these techniques. Like if I haven't seen them lately, probably because I'm watching less commercial TV. But there were for years these what I called mattress screamer ads, where there's a guy selling mattresses, and basically he would be screaming at you in the ad. They would record it at the highest sound level allowable by the stations, and they were just so annoying that you literally would grab the remote and either change the channel or mute it. And clearly, those ads got your attention. You couldn't be sitting there, quietly watching TV without suddenly noticing this guy screaming at you. But I always question their effectiveness. Do people actually say, "Wow, that's a place where I'd like to buy a mattress," or saying, "God, I wouldn't go there if it was the last mattress store on earth."
It's true, and it's a good question, and I mean that the volume thing does happen a lot, especially it's hard to do on network TV, but I've noticed, but a lot of online advertisements where there's like Hulu used to do this, and maybe they still do, where some ads would just be insanely loud, like where you'd have to like go up and adjust your volume. But I don't know. I mean, I think there's a world in which, in a world in which the commodity seems to be attention on apps, whenever you sign up for a product, you're instantly subscribed to a mailing list, and there's all kinds of push notifications that basically, whenever you sign up or download an app, you have to go through and turn off the notifications every single time. Because the commodity of business success is attention, and maybe it's a race to the bottom, and they find some effectiveness there. Maybe not. I don't know.
Could be.
Yeah, and I think there in some business arenas, for many companies, the brand is really important, and so they care a lot about what you've been talking about, Roger, not hurting the brand. But there are some situations where the brand is designed to be short-lived. They don't, this app, this product, this whatever is not going to be around for a long time, and it's going to either disappear or be subsumed into another brand. So they care more about that. The attention short-term gain of what they're trying to do than they do about caring in the long term about the brand.
Mm-hmm. Well, every advertiser is different and has different motivations, but I think most businesses are looking at the long term, and that really forces them to engage in mostly ethical behavior, because particularly in today's social media driven society, you cannot get away with much as a brand. There were times when you could sell a product that wasn't particularly good, and people wouldn't know about it, at least not for a long time, until they experienced it themselves. Now, if you sell a bad product, the whole world's going to know about it within 24 hours.
Yeah, I was just at. I agree with you. However, I saw an interesting talk at a conference at the end of 2017 that I was speaking at, which is the Belgium Belgium Association of Marketing conference, and there was a speaker there from the UK who gave a talk, and he had actual data. And he said that, and he was showing us the data. There's a lot of misconceptions about how whether some of the social media brand issues actually do long-term harm to a brand. So he used, for example, the whole United Airlines, which has, had some incidents, right?
Right.
And that went viral, and, YouTube videos, and they were real incidents. And he compared, so he had a couple of examples like this where he compared the incident and the virality, whatever you want to call it, on social media that was negative impact. But then he compared that to revenue and stock price over the next, year. And he even compared the stock price the next day. And, it was interesting because you saw, it's like it didn't have an impact. It didn't have an impact on the stock. It had an impact of a couple of hours on the stock price. And then the stock price that by the next day was, higher than it was before, and continued to go up throughout the year. And the revenue for the company had no impact. And so I think it's an interesting question. I mean, believe me, I believe in branding a lot, and I know the brands care about their impression. But then one wonders, in the long term, whether that will have the modifying effect on, ethical marketing decisions that it seems to be having right now. If these incidents don't affect, the bottom line in the long term.
Well, I think there's different kinds of incidents and failures too. United's a good example. I am a loyal United customer.
Yeah.
You'd have to drag me off kicking and screaming to get me off United plane.
We also fly United as a business.
Right. So
United, sponsor this podcast.
The reason I'm loyal is not because I'm loyal to Amazon because their service is great. Okay, yeah. They're predictable. They're basically everything about their service is top notch. United, I'm loyal because they treat me really well because I'm an elite flyer, and if I go to American, they put me in a middle seat in the back row. In United, I can get my choice of seats and maybe get bumped up to first class, even if I pay for an economy ticket if I'm lucky. So there's different kinds of loyalty. But, I think when people see the picture of that guy getting dragged off the plane, they can apply that to their own experience with the brand. Like, I've never seen an incident like that on any airplane, on any airline. And this person was, clearly interested in making some kind of an incident or a statement. And the perpetrators were not the airline. They were police, airport police, who are probably not the most trained folks in the world. And, so I think that you could say, well, boy, that really was pretty awful. But, it didn't really affect what I thought my next United flight would be like. I didn't expect to get, beaten up. On the other hand, some things like and I don't know about the data on this. I haven't seen the data on, let's say, Wells Fargo market share and profitability and so on. But when there was a sort of massive endemic fraud going on there that was pervasive across apparently the entire country and most branches, where they were creating these fake accounts to make their sales goals and signing people up for stuff they didn't sign up for. To me, that is potentially a more damaging kind of exposure that might have been swept under the rug a little bit before. Might have been written about in the Wall Street Journal, get a few articles in newspapers, but undoubtedly I got exposed to many more people because of both the internet news cycle and amplified by social media.
Yeah. So, Roger, we want you to do the neuromarketing study, in which we look at the neuromarketing evidence of this difference between, an initial reaction to a public social media things going viral event versus the personal sustained experience of the brand. It'd be interesting to see, from a neuroscience reaction, what's going on in your brain when you see the, video of the United situation, if indeed you are actually a United fan, right? Or at least very comfortable with the United brand. Versus if you see something like that for a brand that you don't have a relationship with, are you processing and filtering that differently in your brain because of a positive brand experience that
it's almost certainly true because of the fMRI work done by Reed Montague years ago with the sort of replay of the Pepsi challenge in an fMRI machine, where his data showed that people were more influenced by the brand than by the taste of the product. Whatever they thought was Coke, whether it was Coke or Pepsi, tasted better to their brains. Basically, it was so. I think that positive brand association certainly does change the way you process new information. And I think the other thing the social media cycle affects too are new products. So if you have a brand new product that nobody's experienced yet, and initially a lot of the reports are bad, you get some bad reviews, and then these are again amplified by social media, and people have some horror stories about their use of the product. I think that's where it can be really damaging. A really well-established brand probably won't be hurt that much by an incident that involves their regular product. You could have something bad happen, where a Coke truck ran over 10 people or something, and people say, that's horrible, but most folks aren't going to stop drinking Coca-Cola because of it. On the other hand, if Coca-Cola introduced a new product and it was found to be harmful, or people just really hated the taste and talked about it, that could really kill the launch.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to change topics here. Before we started the podcast recording, you mentioned that you are working on a new book. So, do we get any hints?
Well, yeah, I can talk about it a little bit. It's going to be my contract is with McGraw-Hill, and the topic is an outgrowth. A few years ago, I developed a little framework for persuasion. I call it the persuasion slide, and it's has some roots in the work of B.J. Fogg at Stanford, where you have to have, he says you have to have a motivation to do something, you have to have the ability to do it, and then a trigger to initiate it. And if you have those three things in the right combination, you can change that behavior. And that behavior change could be placing an order on a website. It could be flossing your teeth every evening or whatever. But I found that model just a little bit confusing and hard to explain to people. And also, I wanted to tease out the difference between conscious and non-conscious factors, because to me, everything in marketing, you have to look at it from both standpoints. People do need rational information at times. If you're buying a technical product, if I just bought a shower head on Amazon, a shower head assembly, that I needed technical information to know if it was going to fit. I had to know what the ceiling clearance was. I had to know what the distance and what the height of the thing was so it didn't interfere with the control and so on. I definitely needed that boring, rational, logical information. But you also have to have those emotional drivers or non-conscious drivers that are all the things that you and I write about in marketing. So I wanted to cover both of those bases. And so I developed this little model called the persuasion slide. And if anybody's interested, they can just Google that and they'll find probably my blog post and a book. I've got just a Kindle book at Amazon on the topic. But one of the elements in the slide is friction. It's what prevents the behavior from happening. When the little kid gets on the slide, he gets nudged at the top, he's sliding down it. and then gets stuck in the middle because their slide is rusty. That's friction. And that's what happens to people when they abandon their merchandise on an e-commerce site in their shopping cart. You think about all the money that's wasted in SEO and content marketing, web design, pay-per-click ads that gets people to e-commerce websites and gets them to shop around, to put the product in their cart. But then people get to the checkout process and find it confusing or difficult, or just it's much easier to do something else. And last year, e-commerce sales were $2 trillion almost. It's 1.9 some trillion dollars, huge number. But the amount of merchandise left in abandoned e-commerce shopping carts was $4.6 trillion. That is a huge amount of waste, and not all of it is because of checkout difficulty or other issues, confusion. Sometimes people have to put stuff in there to see what the shipping is, or they're saving it for the future or something. But a huge amount of that is because just people could not get across the finish line because there was some element of difficulty there. And so that is the topic for my book. And I really try and relate it to beyond the sort of simple conversion and persuasion processes we use as marketers, but also to look at, for instance, why some areas are more successful. Why did Silicon Valley succeed when Boston arguably had a more robust tech culture in the early days of tech? Why did they not turn into Silicon Valley and the huge success it is today? Why did India fail? 30 years ago, India's economy was bigger than China's. Today, China's is 8 times the size of India's. And I would argue that a big part of that is for years, particularly in the 90s, India's totally Kafkaesque bureaucracy that made it impossible for both entrepreneurs to get stuff done and for international companies to operate there. To me, this all relates to friction and difficulty in doing things. So that's going to be the topic of the book.
All right. Now, see, this is because you're an engineer.
It
so
is?
You're going to write it. Yeah, because friction is.
I think
there's the science of what friction is.
Yeah, and it has an analog in the physical world, of course, because that's where the term comes from. But for hundreds or thousands of years, friction was around, but it was invisible to people. They didn't really see it as a force. Believe it or not, the first person to see it was Leonardo da Vinci, and he conducted some experiments in friction that look a lot like some of the ones the early physicists use. Involving weights and surfaces rubbing against each other. And he actually developed some numbers for a coefficient of friction, which is something that modern physics understands pretty well.
Oh, that's great.
But then his work was lost for, 80 or 100 years or more. Wow. It was only discovered much later after other scientists had also investigated the topic. And the reason is, in some ways like gravity, it's invisible. It's there. It affects things, but you can't really see it. And as a result, it took a long time to discover.
Well, that's interesting. I like that. Analogy or metaphor, because I think that in terms of, if you think about design, right, interaction design and user experience design, I think sometimes it's hard to get companies and teams and product owners to understand that they need to change a design or worry about a design or measure a design for these problems, because like friction, right? You don't see it. You don't see, and you may not even be measuring it, right? You might be measuring how many people, as you said, come to the product page, how many people check out. And I know people measure abandonment, but I don't know that they pay attention to that as much.
Next level.
Yeah, and it's not just abandoned. It's like, why abandon? Right? I think one of the interesting questions in user experience that one of the things I talk to clients a lot about is okay, you know what happened, but you don't know why it happened. And if you don't understand why it's happening, then whatever fix you apply, it could be way off, because
right. Yeah. If you're just guessing,
you're fixing the wrong problem.
people don't seem to get to this next step here. Well, let's make the button bigger.
That's right.
The size of the button may not be the problem. It may be something else entirely.
Yeah, yeah. So I really like that idea of, the problem being potentially something that everyone is forgetting to look at and forgetting to measure, because it's invisible. So that sounds like it's going to be a great book. What's your do you have a
I don't know what the publication date will be. I'm delivering the manuscript a little bit later this year, and then we'll see how long it takes to get through the
maybe
process.
like early 2019.
That's what I would expect. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, all right, one other question. When you always give a lot of talks, right? Do a lot of public speaking.
I do.
What are some of do you have an upcoming talk or something you know about already for 2018?
Oh, well, yeah, I've got a few lined up. I'll be in Orlando in just less than a couple of weeks now for a socialmedia.org event. Oh, that's a private event. People can't sign up for that. And then I've got a gig in Baltimore for an education conference, interestingly enough, a little bit later, doing a lecture at University of Chicago coming up in just about 3 weeks. So, and then either a keynote or a workshop in Milan, Italy, a little bit later in spring, and probably a few others in there too. But it keeps me busy and helps pay the bills.
So, do you have a favorite new talk that you're putting together that you haven't done before?
My content is constantly evolving. I keep trying to update it and bring in the latest stuff. So rather than my talks, I guess, are kind of like Amazon's web pages. You never perceive that it looks totally different. But if you compared it to a page from 10 years ago, you'd see a whole lot of
totally
changes.
Different. Yeah.
And so it's the things that I like to get into, though, are less obvious topics. I mean, a lot of my talks have to do with basically conversion and how to sell more stuff. But I think it's fun too to talk about how you can help accomplish change in organizations, how you can use some of these tools for very positive, social and business reasons.
Mm. One of Guthrie's favorite topics too, change in the organization. Hey, Roger, thanks so much for joining us. It's been really fun talking to you. Why don't you tell us again the best ways to get hold of you if someone wants to look you up?
Sure. Well, Google's a great starting point. Just Google Roger Dooley and you'll find most of my stuff. The best jumping off point is rogerdooley.com, where I've got links to my various blogs and social links. On Twitter, which is probably my social medium of choice, I am at Roger Dooley.
Okay. Hey, maybe we'll see you on one of those United flights.
Yeah, maybe. I'll be the one trying to hang on to the seats as they're pulling me off by my feet.
I hope not. All right.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Roger.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Guthrie. Bye-bye now.